This is the Expo Forum in St. Petersburg, Russia. In this building on July 27, 2023, Vladimir Putin gathered representatives from 49 African countries for the third Russia-Africa Summit. A lot of the top power brokers in Africa were in this building on that day, but one important country was missing. Just as Vladimir Putin told the attendants that the African continent is emerging as a new center of power right before our eyes, 8,000 kilometers away in the heart of the Sahel, members of Niger's presidential guard overthrew the democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum. And as the coup unfolded, something strange happened. A bunch of the citizens came out to show their support for the army, but they also had these Russian flags and signs like this. Here's an eerily similar scene in neighboring Mali, and another in Burkina Faso from the year before. Now, there is a stretch of Kremlin-linked regimes across the entire Sahel. Russia's private security firm, the Wagner Group, showed up in Niger shortly after the coup, just as they did in Mali and Burkina Faso. There were already over 1,000 American troops and over 5,000 French troops with military bases scattered across this region. And we can't forget about Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. There are a lot of people with a lot of guns vying for political power and control over this territory and its resources. And in this battle of competing interests, the millions of people who inhabit this country have very little say. Yet, it is these everyday people just trying to make a living in one of the toughest regions in the world that suffer all of the consequences. So, I want to figure out what's up with all the coups in Africa. Why do Russia and the West care about this region? And what's going on with these Russian flags? What do the people really want?
In the last 2 years, 6 countries across Western and Central Africa suffered what the UN has called an epidemic of coups.
The military has arrested several top politicians.
But Russia's influence looms large in the region.
Take a look at this chart. It shows the total number of coups in Africa from 1952 until today. There have been 98 coups in the 70-year period, which is an average of 1.4 coups every year. If you look at West Africa specifically, every single country except Senegal and the tiny island of Cape Verde has experienced at least one military coup in their post-independence history. The majority of these coups were internal affairs driven by local politics. But there's a long history of meddling by the great powers. The end of colonization in Africa coincided with the Cold War era.
Most thinking Americans now recognize the fact that our country is at war. A war declared against us by the rulers of international communism. It is called a Cold War.
The US was focused on containing the spread of communism worldwide and preventing the expansion of Soviet influence. But the Soviet Union had an advantage in Africa because communist ideology was inherently anti-colonial and pro-revolution. Vladimir Lenin's writings considered imperialism to be the highest form of capitalism, and communism's appeal to the oppressed really resonated with people living under colonial rule. Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, was one of those people this ideology resonated with. So much so that he wrote this book, echoing Lenin almost word for word. Now, the US also supported African independence, but they were also close allies with the major imperial powers, and nothing was more important to them than preventing the spread of communism. The US was so obsessed with fighting communism at home and abroad that the FBI had opened a file on Kwame Nkrumah while he was still an undergrad at Lincoln University. They didn't know that he was going to be the future president of Ghana. In fact, they didn't think he was capable of any leadership or independent thinking. They just investigated anyone in the US who was associated with communism or the Communist Party in any way, shape, or form. Nkrumah happened to sponsor the Council of African Affairs, which the FBI had kept under surveillance for many years. After Nkrumah became president, the US was becoming increasingly worried about his ideology, particularly because of how much influence Nkrumah had across the continent. In 1964, the CIA issued this special report about the leftward trend in Ghana and Nkrumah's plans to turn the country into a totalitarian one-party state. Then, in January 1966, this intelligence summary blamed Nkrumah for leading a leftist propaganda campaign against the US. Less than a month later, Nkrumah was overthrown in a military coup that is widely believed to have been backed by the CIA.
India's Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, meets President Nkrumah of Ghana. That is, he was president at the moment these pictures were taken. 2 days later, he was overthrown in a coup by military forces. Nkrumah was on his way to Peking to end the war in Vietnam, he said. It was on the day after his arrival in the Red Chinese capital that he heard the sad news he was out of a job.
Now, there's no evidence that the US was directly responsible for the coup, but they didn't have to overthrow him themselves to get what they wanted. In this memo, the director of the Office of West African Affairs details a proposed action program for Ghana that could induce a chain reaction leading to Nkrumah's downfall. This action plan included psychological warfare to diminish support for Nkrumah and destabilize his government. This is exactly how the US and the Soviet Union operated in Africa during the Cold War, working in the shadows and taking advantage of events that were going to occur on their own. Only in very rare cases would they directly intervene when the stakes were too high. Except for those rare cases, it's hard to blame coups d'etats entirely on foreign involvement. You see, military coups are complex events driven by lots of intricately intertwined factors. But there are three broad categories of causes of military coups, and it's helpful to differentiate them with this iceberg metaphor developed by the UNDP. The tip of the iceberg are the triggers. They are visible one-off events that kick off the conflict. These triggers are usually political and unique to each country. Nkrumah had fired the chief and deputy chief of defense staff, which put him in the crosshairs of the entire security apparatus. The proximate causes of the coup are visible just above the surface. It includes the foreign involvement, but also the severe economic crisis that Ghana was going through at the time. Prices had increased by 70% in the 3 years leading up to the coup, at the same time that per capita income was falling. The citizens were getting poorer and increasingly frustrated with the government. Here is three-time coup plotter Ibrahim Babangida talking about the dangers of a frustrated society.
You see, to stage a coup, there is one basic element that everybody looks for. Frustration in the society.
Frustration in society.
Right. We find coup easier when there is frustration in society.
The third category are structural causes. These are much deeper and harder to see, just like the bulk of this iceberg. The factors are things like military involvement in politics, low levels of economic development, and governments that aren't democratic or dictatorships but share characteristics of both. Structurally, Ghana in 1966 was a democracy in name but autocracy in practice. No one could unseat Kwame Nkrumah in an election. When he organized a referendum to become president for life, the official results showed 99.9% in favor, with 96% voter turnout, which is suspicious to say the least. With no way to voice their displeasure at the government's handling of the country, thousands of Ghanaians welcomed the coup and hit the streets to show support for the army.
Ghana had been one of the first African nations to gain independence, but her days of democracy were short-lived when Nkrumah elected himself for life, jailed all his foes, and began a despotic rule.
So fast forward to 2023. As the Nigerian army took control of key institutions, they got on TV to deliver the classic coup speech, explaining to their country and to the world why they overthrew the government. The leader of the coup said the intervention was necessary to avoid the gradual and inevitable demise of the country due to insecurity and slow economic growth. In Burkina Faso, the soldiers said they were putting an end to the regime due to the president's inability to manage the Islamist insurgency. When Malian soldiers overthrew their own government, they said they weren't holding on to power but holding on to the stability of the country. You can't help but wonder if these coups are all happening for the same reason. All of the countries are right next to each other, and the Russian flags keep showing up over and over again. Now, how those Russian flags show up after every coup in the Sahel is the next part of the story. But first we need to understand why these coups keep happening. The soldiers all say that the coups happen because of security and internal problems, but you can't believe what a military officer says when he gets on TV to overthrow the government, because the speech itself is a part of the coup. This is a book by Anthony Kirk Green, a British historian and former colonial administrator in Nigeria. It's a comprehensive study of broadcast speeches made by coup leaders in Africa. Anthony Kirk Green finds that the justifications in all of the speeches follow a formulaic pattern regardless of the country's specific context. Now that's because the point of the broadcast is not to justify their actions, but to make everyone else think that their victory is already complete. It's a confidence trick. So to figure out why the coups are continuing to happen, we can look at the iceberg framework again. The triggers are very similar to the Nkrumah coup in 1966. The president of Niger decided to fire the top army general a couple of days before the coup happened. In Mali in 2022, the coup was also triggered by the proposed removal of 2 military officers from the transitional cabinet. But again, these events are just the tip of the iceberg. The Islamist insurgency in the Sahel is a proximate cause because it's displaced over 3 million people and impacted political culture in the region. People who have been forced to leave their homes due to safety concerns become upset with the government because their basic job is to keep their lives and property safe. Again, this meant that there was
frustration in the society.
Just like Ghana in 1966, all of these countries share characteristics which make them vulnerable to coup d'etats even without foreign interference. So why does Russia choose to intervene? And why do the citizens seem to support them? Well, the world is changing. After the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s, the US enjoyed over 2 decades as the world's only superpower. And now Vladimir Putin wants to change that. He's forming alliances with America's traditional adversaries like North Korea, China, and Iran in order to challenge the Western-led global system. And just like in the Cold War, Russia wants to disrupt Western interests in Africa and bring as many countries as possible into its sphere of influence. Controlling the Sahel lets Putin threaten NATO's southern flank by manipulating the flow of weapons, resources, and migrants through the buffer zone. Countries like Italy and Spain bear the brunt of the instability, creating tensions between these countries and the rest of the EU. So, Russia offers weapons, military assistance, and disinformation services to African countries in exchange for natural resources like gold, oil, and uranium, while also gaining political influence. This chart shows Russian weapon sales to African countries increased from $500 million to $2 billion between 2014 and 2018. And this map shows all of the countries where Russia has carried out disinformation campaigns. These campaigns are the modern-day equivalent of America's Cold War-era psychological warfare. Russia uses online disinformation to undermine democracies, support coups, and most importantly, to stir up anti-French sentiments on the continent. But the people don't need to be misinformed in order to hate France. The memory of French colonialism, which was defined by repression, cultural erasure, and racial segregation, is still very much alive. This is a report published by the French Parliament on their military interventions abroad. The French have intervened over 50 times in Africa, and in many cases to support unpopular dictators, like in Chad, where French soldiers saved Idriss Déby from multiple rebellions before his death in 2021. The citizens of this region have accepted that everyone from France to Russia to their own governments just want to exploit their country and its resources for their own interests. But they would at least like to get something in return. After their governments, in collaboration with France, have failed to beat the terrorists and keep them safe, they're happy to support their armies in collaboration with Russia if it means that they can live in peace. As Russia and the West vie for influence here, the hopes and desires of these people will continue to be overshadowed by geopolitics. Should our focus really be on who will hold power, or on whether these people can one day live their lives free from terrorism and foreign soldiers? Perhaps that choice has already been made for them.